Right, so it is day 56 of my New Year's tree planting resolution thing. So let's go around and check up on how everything's doing. First up, we have our macadamia, which is still just kind of stagnating. These growth tips are definitely there. They're just not doing anything yet. There is a thrips on one, but not many thrips, so I'm not convinced they're stunting it. It's just taking its time. So next up is our eastern triello, the aloidendron, which is still looking nice and healthy, a bit mud splattered still. You can see the Kalanchoe longiflora is doing better than the peperomia. The Kalanchoe lucea is looking quite healthy, but the peperomia seems to have been a little bit rain battered. But yeah, I'm going to be taking note when this first leaf passes there, but currently we've got a long way to go. Our sabal palmetto. The mole rats did come close here, but still seems firmly rooted, so hopefully they haven't been doing any notable nibbling there. I haven't known them to consume the bases of palmettos before, but they are sometimes a little bit unpredictable, especially if a plant is new and still a little bit unsettled. The other palmetto is, yeah, again, not really showing any obvious signs of progress yet. I'm not convinced this leaf hasn't come up. It might have done a bit, but it's nothing major yet. Our little pink mango, you can see, is covered in new growth. This has really come up since going in. Obviously this is fresh from seed. The second one seems to have entirely disappeared. I suspect something, maybe one of the pouch rats might have decided to have a snack. So I'm quite glad they haven't done that on both, which is why insurance sometimes is pretty helpful. And our little tree hibiscus is covered. I mean, the only leaf that was on it to begin with that's still here is this one. All the rest are new, which is really very, very pleasing. Yeah. Our soursop carries on growing and seems to be getting a little bit more upright, which might be to do with the canopy getting a little darker, so it's tending a little bit more towards the light it is getting. But yeah, I'm not convinced about the health of that growth point. No, that's not healthy. But otherwise, we've had some good growth. We've got some healthy growth points over there and there. Just one slightly dry one. And some of the little growing tips on this little bay laurel, Laurus nobilis, opening out nicely. Some of them still with a way to go, but a lot of them coming up. Sorry, the cotyledon's getting in the way there. Then our little Bauhinia petersiana, you can see the new growth has really opened up. Basically everything beyond this point is new. And you can see that's all, this leaf isn't, but this little branchlet is, and this is, as it's got some more coming on it. It's got a little bit of damage, but yeah, growing and growing. I don't know that there's anything really changing yet. I do find palms take a long time to get settled sometimes here, but the Washingtonia filifera, I think, is not doing much just yet, but we'll see. A little tiny Mpundu seedling. They basically, once they're once they're a foot tall, they are just a little bit too big to move because they are very, very deep rooted. So I'm hoping that I've got this soon enough and I haven't done too much root damage for it to tolerate. But so far it's not showing any signs of stress from the transplanting, so I'm happy with that. The first of its sabal companions also looking nice and healthy. The second of the sabals not showing any obvious stress yet. And this little phoenix that came with it still seeming healthy. This will go yellow, especially around the base. They do sulk after transplanting, but it should come back. So you can see this waterberry, having taken such a long time to get moving, is now really going. So this whole little stem here is all since the transplant. So we've got, you know, a couple of inches of growth there, which is good. Still no sign of any progress on its little neighbour here. And over here, yeah, no change yet to this one. And I don't think there's anything new on this one either. With the way the sun's been up and down, Rolf's not entirely convinced, but the growth points are still vigorous and upright and quite nice and healthy, so clearly he's getting enough water, just a little bit of stress on the older leaves that might have come up in a shadier spot to begin with. So our lychee tree here, looking fairly nice. These are the leaves that were quite buckled last time. They've still got a bit of buckle, but the texture seems happier, so I think that's settling in. And this one is colouring up nicely. Can't remember how much of this is already on when I went in. I think nothing of this is new since it went in, but it's a nice texture. It's seeming healthy. And this little Artocarpus, the jackfruit, is nice and healthy, and the growth point is coming up nicely, just there. So that's good. On to our cashews. They're looking more and more like they might get counted at the end of the month. So this is one very vigorous little one. Two, also nice and vigorous. Three, showing some good growth. Four, another one with quite a lot of growth. And the fifth one, who definitely has a caterpillar now living in this growing tip, which is going to distort it for a while, but it looks healthy other than that. Generally speaking, with cashews, you don't get non-specialists eating them because they are good and toxic, so provided the plant isn't fundamentally stressed, this shouldn't do it too much damage. And this agarus, the central stem, is nice and firm, so that should come up and open up. I think this has actually come up a few inches since last week. We'll see, so maybe mid-March I'd expect that to start opening out. So our original queen palm planting, sorry, bit of a tongue twister there. Nice and healthy, no significant signs of stress. Yeah, coming up well. This companion over here, a little bit behind, but it was to begin with. This is coming up, I would say, just not as fast as it could perhaps. So we've had some more sunny days this last week, and you're starting to see a little bit more sun damage on the leaves of this Dracaena studinary. So it's not as delighted with life as I should like, but it's not bad. It's just a little bit of yellowing. And the central leaves pretty healthy, and it's still very upright. I mean, it doesn't have much choice with these aloes propping it up, but it's looking fine. You can actually see some sunburn on the calico, which is atypical, but with the sort of torrential rain and then those very sunny days we've had this last week, that can happen. It's sister, who is going in from a truncheon rather than a rooted piece, you can see is much more sunburned. Got this real white colouring on the leaves coming up, but still reasonably upright, more so than the one we're going to talk about next. You can see this is what real sun stress looks like on a Dracaena. So this is the Mesangiana around the capoc. I was getting to the point where they're actually leaning on the capoc more than they're sheltering it. But the capoc itself is looking quite nice and healthy. I wouldn't say there's any distinct new growth. There's a couple of points that are threatening it, but as yet no sign of actual growth. Which likewise for its little beard there. Sorry, Mike. We've also got no new growth showing yet on this little Brachystegia taxifolia, but I wasn't going to expect that straight away, so provided it's not too damaged, I'm reasonably happy. The same can be said for the second one. There is a little bit more sunburn on this one, because I guess there must be an angle at which the sun's getting through the surroundings. And just done a little bit of damage right by the base there, but mostly it looks healthy enough. Third of these, which is the most sheltered, is definitely looking the healthiest, but it was the largest, I think, to begin with. There's no evidence of new growth yet, but that does look like a growing point coming up in the middle, so hopefully soon. No real change yet on the Phoenix that went in on the same day. You can see its youngest leaf there, but it doesn't seem to have done anything. It's not dead, but it's not doing much yet either. Queen palms, meanwhile, somewhat flapping around. I think this might have been visited by a weaver bird, because I feel like it had more leaves when it went in, and the weavers are nesting at the moment, so maybe stripping it. But this central one is looking healthy enough, so I'm happy with that. And again, we're kind of overlooking the outside, because this one was very flopped in its original location. Had been a little bit trampled, I think, but central leaf is healthy enough, so I'm happy with that. There is another one coming up here. Nope, it's part of the same. Okay, so I'm happy with that. The new growth on our Cagelia, the sausage tree, is opening out very nicely. You can see there is a little bit of caterpillar damage happening here. I'm not too concerned about that. It's restricted primarily to the leaves. Doesn't really seem to be going into the growing point, so I'm happy enough about that. The plumeria that went in on the same day really does seem like those leaves are turning the right way up, so we might actually be adding that to the count beginning of March as well. Staying in this slightly tangled thicket, this little lychee is still a little bit brittle in the leaves here. The new growth feels much healthier. Growing point not doing much, but there is definitely a little green bit there, so I'm happy with that. The amla, of course, looking perfectly happy because amlas do that, and it'll probably drop all its leaves again at the end of the rains. Once they're mature, they're barely deciduous because they are constantly dropping leaves, but they're constantly growing more. So hopefully this will only be for a few years that it'll look like a stick during the dry season. Okay, and then I have not yet removed leaves from this aloe, but this little lychee here doesn't seem to be suffering for it, so I'm quite happy with that. Giant chef flower is looking like it will be there to celebrate Wyatt's next birthday as well, so yeah, I'm very happy with that. Some really good growth. I would not be surprised if this added about half its height to it this year, because this is looking pretty vigorous, so I think this is a pretty good spot for it. So perhaps unsurprisingly, with the very fluctuating weather we've had, Hamilton is not looking any happier than he was last week. Still very sunburned, no signs of progress. I don't think he's looking distinctly worse, but he's not looking distinctly better, which is what I'm kind of rooting for at this point. Other little Colophospermum, which is Aitken, is looking much happier. I don't know why Hamilton's a he and Aitken's a she. I mean, both named after a she, but there we go. But Aitken is looking much happier than Hamilton, but isn't really showing it. Oh, hello. There we go. We've got a tiny little bit of growth coming here on Aitken, so that's good. They clearly want to start with a little bit of undergrowth around it, even if not in deep shade. So our little rough lemon, who's still adventuring with caterpillars, you can see, still in their bird dropping phase, these little citrus swallowtails. Again, they're sticking quite nicely to the mature leaves. Not seeing any damage to the growth points yet. That'll be when the woolly bears come along that we might see that. But this should spring back from this. It's just kind of a shame that it looks so tatty at the moment, but it's a beautiful butterfly. And again, it tends to stimulate quite healthy growth the way they feed, so I'm not too concerned about this. I can't really tell how much is happening here. I'm not sure whether there's new growth or whether it's just standing up really nicely and looking quite bright. But this should be our Arthromatophyllum bipinnatum, our tree philodendron, which is looking healthy enough. So hopefully it will be getting bigger soon. Is this? No, that's not newly open. Our tree tomato is still looking very healthy. You can see some of the older leaves yellowing off a bit. Just nip that one off. But yeah, it's a generally very happy looking plant. Hasn't suffered any visible insults. And nice healthy new growth in the middle still. I feel like the tea tree is a bit higher, but I'm not convinced that that's not just wishful thinking. When I look at it directly, I'm not convinced there's been any visible change at all. There's still lots of nice tender new growth. No real distinction between any sort of settled growth and old growth, so I don't think any of that sort of hardened off to mature growth yet. But it looks fine, the base looks fine, it has the same bark damage it had when I put it in, and there are some ants showing interest, which makes me wonder if I should thicken up some of the Plectanthrus neochilus around it, try and just disrupt their little lives a bit. But generally speaking, nothing too concerning. And it's getting to that point where the original growth on our little moringa is no longer a major part of its canopy. So I'm just dropping that off, feeding it to the soil. the new growth is so vigorous. I mean, you can see all this green stem that's come up since it went in, so that is a really, really healthy little sapling, really nice little one. So the first little lychee that went in, no real progress yet. Again, I mean, that original growth that was so pale when it went in is a nice green colour now. It's not just stuffing, but with this rain, more mud has been splashed up onto these leaves. The original growth is starting to crinkle a little bit, which isn't ideal without there being new growth. And there's no sign of any action from the growing tips yet. But nothing too serious one way or another. No real growth, no real complaints. Hopefully it's just in that sort of settling in phase. The first bit of new growth that turned up on our little mangosteen, the Garcinia, is, yeah, that's pretty much settled in and matured now. The second bit still red, but still coming up nicely. A little bit of distortion to the shape there as it's sort of trying to lean into the center to replace this central point, which isn't even showing any thought of growth yet. But healthy enough little plant. Its sister, the other Garcinia, is, yeah, the new growth is coming out nicely. Some of the old growth is quite rigid on this, but I'm not very familiar with these trees. That might be how they normally are when settled. It's sort of more like a laurel. I'm certainly textured like a laurel at the moment, but healthy enough, and no, still no sign of new growth on the upright. One that is showing new growth and showing that caterpillars aren't all bad is our little Thespesias. This is the Jackalberry, which is one of the sort of ebony-related trees with an edible fruit. Ebonies and persimmons, both Thespesias, so kind of a bit misleading there. But yeah, some lovely new growth coming to replace everything that was eaten off there. I'd say it's actually got more new growth than it had leaves when I got it, so I'm pretty happy with that. A more complicated picture on this little Eugenia uniflora, the Suriname cherry. So for the most part, the leaves have regained a nice texture. This growing point though here is just done for, and I'm wondering if I should snip it off because it doesn't seem to have given up its dominance yet. So we're not seeing what we would usually expect, just a little bit of greening up, well, a little bit of swelling up of these little stems down around here, ready to take over as the new growing point. This one, the growing point itself, is inactive, but the leaves around it are perfectly healthy. But hopefully, we'll keep an eye on it for a bit. If nothing happens, then we'll just snip that tip off, and hopefully that'll trigger some new growth. So that went in with this callistemon, the bottlebrush tree, which seems to me to be growing a lot faster than the tea tree. Although, again, very, very pale growth. What had been red is now down here, I think. So this is a new, slightly pinkish new growth. It's pink in a few places, which is weird because it's very pale in others. So I just don't understand Australian trees and how they communicate. I need to get more familiar with them. So I guess this is an exercise in that. So our little arboreal representative of President's Day, you know, handkerchief tree to represent the handkerchiefs always carried by our first president, Kenneth Kaunda, is here and quite happy. Also got a little visitor in here, another of our giant green millipedes. She's going to poop on me though, so I will get her off quickly. Yeah, nice and healthy, no real complaints. The growing tip looks healthy enough, and because this is in a more sheltered spot than the original one that went in, it's not looking bad. There's definitely been some moles around here because I did not leave the soil this high up, but base is still firmly in. So I'm happy enough with that. I will say, to even things out politically, because Kenneth Kaunda is, again, not uncontroversial, I'm going to call this Alice, this little tree, and you're welcome to try and explore why that might be. So our little wild pear, Dombeya, which I will once again say, bit of a misnomer, the flowers are like pear flowers, but there is no edible fruit. But you can see the new growth now has a new bit of new growth on it. So this was all, yeah, this was the pink growth not long after it went in, and this is a new tip coming up. And if you look in here, the point which had been stagnating so utterly, you can see a nice little bit of new growth. There's a few of these about. So I am very happy with that. That seems settled in. The K apple again is looking nice and vigorous. More or less all these leaves you're seeing, apart from some of these older yellow ones, are new since it went in. It had that little pause where it was not happy about life, and then it just shot up with these lovely new green bits of growth, and still looking pretty good. The Bauhinia variegata, which had been so tragic and sunburned, you can see looking really nice and vigorous there. And you can see more down there of the sort of backup plantings that turn out to be kind of surplus to requirements. So the second one, which did get less burned, is showing more growth this week than it had last. Some nice new leaves coming up here, tender and pale. I hadn't really noticed that they had pale growth. Got nice new growth on all of them down here too. Another lemon sitting around doing not much. I do think there's been more insect consumption here. This does look like some caterpillars have come along and chowed down a few leaves. See, they tend to stop where it overlaps with the aloe or the phobia. But I do think someone's been a nibbling. But it's not in bad health. I think its colour might have actually improved a little. But it's not really doing anything much yet. Whereas this one does look like it's been doing a little bit of growing. Not sure. It does again have some citrus swallowtail caterpillars, just little tiny ones turning up there. But it's definitely not in a bad state. It's looking pretty healthy, so I'm pretty happy with that. Right, so with a droplet of water removed, our first little avocado, the leaf is a nice colour. The new growth is not doing much, and I'm not convinced they haven't dried out a little bit with this weird back and forth on cloud and scorching sun. But it's not showing any cause for concern yet, so I'm not concerned yet. Got a little guy here that mostly seems to like eating our sun hemp. Perfectly happy with him turning that to soil. That's what it's there for. But our second little avocado, this leaf mainly still yellow, growing point looks healthier than the one that's a little more exposed. So hopefully that'll pick up soon. Then on to Fenchurch in her shady bit here. And she is feeling healthy, no sign of any real activity yet. But yeah, she's definitely not throwing herself at the ground here. Ford does seem to be sort of reaching off a bit. I think this might actually be new, these two. Nah, that can't be in this week. But there's definitely a nice little healthy growing tip there. She's going to be doing something soon, and it looks like a nice little meristem there. So this one might be branching out soon. And Arthur, who had been a little bent out of shape last time, so he's going to have a dent there for a while, but he is looking reasonably happy about life for a change. Our little volunteer Revolfia that I got from a friend here, definitely done with its old leaves, but its new growth tip here seems pretty healthy. A little bit burned, but not too bad. One of the very few bits of leaf that was left on one of the Mexican apples that came in as a volunteer, the one amongst the Polynesian arrowroot there, is looking nice and perky. The growth point is bubbling out a little bit, so that should be opening up soon. So I'm happy with that. So the larger Revolfia, so this is the wild quinine, which went into a shadier spot. You can see a lot of the older leaves just falling off because of sunburn. You can also see some nice firm and vigorous growth on the growing tip, so I am happy with that. And the more exposed of the two Mexican apples that went in that day, the growing tip is more upright than it was when it went in, but it's still somewhat flopped here, so take a little while to pick up. The leaf, yeah, a lot softer than on the other, but hopefully that will pick up in time. Mexican apple that went in a couple days before that, the leaf has perked up and the growing tip is also nice and erect and should be opening up soon. Okay, our little Brachystegia spiciformis. Well, the first of the counted ones from this angle, but the second from the usual is nice and healthy still. No sign of growth, but no sign of stress. So I'm happy enough with that. Oh, a lovely little sun jumping spider there. Oh, I have to show you this. This is one I don't see very often. So this should be, if I can get her to look at us the right way, this should be the ogre face spider. So she should, if I'm right, and I am, she should be one of the neck casting spiders. You can see she's quite gravid there, but they have two very large forward-facing eyes. I don't know if I can get an angle that really shows it well, but they're one of the ones that build a web basically between their front legs. Here we go. She's starting to turn around a little bit for us. So they build a web between their front legs and they stretch that out over their prey. So this is Danops, which is the truly ogre-faced one. The other one, Menaeus, which we get, is just called a neck casting spider because it doesn't have those fantastic, gigantic forward-facing eyes that give them that little ogre face. So our little survivor from our stressful Brachystegia planting by the ant's nest. The ants still haven't reappeared, so I think that torrential rain has pretty much put pay to them, and the survivor is getting a little bit less dark and stressed looking, so hopefully we'll be seeing some progress on that soon. I can confirm the stick is still just a stick, but it's actually got some flex in it, so there might be some life still hiding at the base, so don't write it off just yet. The Trachelia growth point is still stagnating, but its little companion, this black-eyed Susan, Dombeya irolata, is coming along very nicely for something that wasn't invited. Very pretty flowers, native, so not too much of a concern, but very, very aggressive. Don't plant them outside of their native range, I would say, unless you're doing it indoors. The other counted Brachystegia here. No progress really since last week, but still a healthy looking little seedling. The growing tip is there, it doesn't look unhealthy, just waiting for it to do something. Sometimes they can be very sort of coordinated in the times of year they'll grow, so it might be that it's just waiting for the weather conditions to be right, that's sort of day length. I'm not sure if these are one of the ones that does that. Mystery fig here, opening up nicely. I'm not sure there's been any major change since last week, but it's still healthy. It's greening up more than it had. Don't really want the leaves going yellow, which will be the concern once, you know, it puts out a fresh flush of leaves and it realizes it doesn't have the nutrition for it. But it looks healthy enough to me, so I'm quite happy with that. And our little standard variety mango. There is a tiny growth point in the middle, but it's not doing anything at the moment. But the original leaves and the ones that were young and tender when we planted it, looking nice and firm and green now. So I'm not too concerned about anything there. Onto our yuccas, which there's a little bit of leaning in the tops there, which is perfectly normal. Like with a lot of the Dracaenas, and actually quite a lot of the plants that go out a little larger, they'll probably end up with a little kink at the top there, but nothing too major. Quite happy with that. Let's see how its bit of dragon fruit is holding up. And it's holding up, so no new growth yet, but they are not usually in a hurry when transplanted. It'll take a while before that does anything other than stay green to show us it's alive. The larger one over here, again the yucca is leaning a little bit. Dragon fruit is there but not really doing anything. The leaniest till last, this yucca is really drooping over quite a bit. Dragon fruit is, yeah, just there for now. I don't expect anything other than just there for at least 2 months, I guess, on those. Our moringa, I'm not sure if there's anything here is new, but it does certainly look healthy, so I'm happy with that. We've got our little winter thorn here. It does seem to be sort of going up and down, because last week it was looking better than the week before, now it's looking worse than last week. There's a lot of little growing points visible along the stem there, which hopefully will perk up. You can start to see, you know, it's dropped a few leaves. I think it's blown around a bit in some of the wind we've had. This was stuck under the aloe, and this had been leafy. You can start to see that really white bark, which will be quite visible once it's mature. The very base will get sort of grey and treaty, but we should have a really striking white branches when it's leafless during the rains once it's mature. So, yesterday's planting, which hasn't really had much chance to do anything yet, but these had actually started to flop over when I planted it in, and they're nice and firm now, so that's a good growth point. This one's not too soft. The main new leaf from where it was is quite arched over, but the central growing point is quite firm. Sorry, it's a bit shadowy there. Angle of the light. It had been cloudy when I started this, I'm sure. So our Malina is a little sorry about today's sunlight. You think last night's rain would have perked it up. The growth point is happy, but it's certainly, yeah, it's still got a way to go before it's settled. Oh, well, that's ahead of schedule. So I talked about expecting something next week on the Bridelia from these bases. You can see actually here. Sorry, I was pointing it completely the wrong direction. So I was expecting something next week on the Bridelias, but you can see already here, got some little growth points starting to poke out from the side. So that is really good, and like a week ahead of schedule. Malina number 2 looking much perkier than Malina number 1. Bridelia number 2. Not yet caught up with number 1, but it didn't suffer stress as dramatically to begin with, so I think it'll take a little longer to catch up in terms of the sort of recovery. We'll see. Malina number 3, you can see quite a lot of growth coming up along the stem here. And Bridelia number 3, yeah, the new growth is still there, and there's some new little bits poking out along the sides. Malina number 4, nice vigorous little crown there. And the last of these Bridelias has a couple of growth points opening out, just here and here, but nothing major yet. The last of this section of the Malinas, like the first one, I think I left a little too much leaf on it for its own good, and so it's a little stressed still and will take it a little longer to settle in. Moving on to the mixed planting, this Jacaranda, which had lost its top, you can see the original there. This growth is so nice and healthy now. A bit pink, which is lovely. Quite scenic, I'd say. The Spathodia tulip tree, you can see this growth is softening to green, and you can see right in the middle there's another growing point opening up. And I think I'm going to rename this little tiny tree hibiscus Hope, because I don't know if you can see in the shadow there how much new growth this has. This is the original leaf, which on the first weekly review was peeled right back and just stuck like a little bit of dead glue to this aloe behind. And now these two new little leaves are perking up so beautifully. Some nice growth on this little Jacaranda, and you can see the Aloe Cameroni, the more orange flower, the Aloe Nieriensis, starting to open up. The last of the Jacarandas, nice bit of new growth, a little bit sort of sun distorted, but nothing too bad. Not too bad actually. The older leaves that went in with it are dying from the tips, not the base, which is usually good. So that's usually when your plant is reclaiming nutrients, it's the tips die. If the plant is dying, it's the bases die. So, sorry, it's kind of hard to get good view in there. There's a lot of wild Commelina about. But yeah, the tip of the new growth is a little bit brown, but the base is nice and green, and this does seem to be coming up a little, so that's good. Our original line of Malinas, which I think was day 2 when these went in, you can see this is really nice and green. It's probably almost as leafy as it was where I took it from, where it had turned up as a volunteer unhelpfully. So yeah, I'd say that's fully settled in now, so there shouldn't be too much to worry about that for now. This is a little less vigorous, but it's in a little less sun, so although it gets to settle more readily, it doesn't get so much energy once it gets going. It does get some afternoon sun, which might be an alternative explanation that it suffered a little more in the heat, but it is very close to a little syringa, I think, that has popped up here. So, but it's looking perfectly reasonable to me. This one a little more out in the open. Yeah, I'd say this is fully settled. This is a lovely, happy little tree. You can see the Calico prolifera is also definitely settling into being in the sun. The sort of internodes will be closer here than they were in the shade, because it's just basically sunlight turns off a growth hormone, which is why plants lean towards the sun most of the time, not always. But yeah, so this certainly seems to have settled in nicely. And the tree, again, seems fully settled. And the last of these little Malinas, again, nice and fully settled with happy aloe, happy calico. Yes, so that should be good. So a lovely little star chestnut, or ghost tree, really. The Sterculia quinquillabata. The growth point is a little slow still, but the leaves are nice and firm and upright, and yeah, I'm very happy with that. So hopefully we'll be getting some decent growth in soon. If not, it'll probably settle in until the next rains, but that growth point looks like it's ready to do something pretty soon. Pachira number 1, of that planting. Nice and healthy looking. Number 2, coming up with the sort of clawed growth that we talked about last time, but yeah, healthy enough. Just, I think that's just the way they do when exposed, really. And number 3, showing much more typical what I expect the shape of new growth to be, but I guess I don't usually check on the ones I plant out this regularly, which hopefully this will lead to better survival rates because I'll be coming along and knowing when things need water, but yeah, I'm happy with that. So, on to the final stretch. Got a nice Cameroni here, I'm going to get distracted by those. And some nice new growth in the middle of this very well settled Brachystegia, so I'm happy with that. Nice settled Brachystegia, more of this claw growth, even though this is one of the less exposed ones, but healthy enough for the previous new growth, and more exposed but more open growth. So yeah, I'm just confused here, but healthy plant, so I'm happy. So our tamarind is sunny and hot, but it's fully open with its leaves, so that seems pretty happy with its root system at the moment. The jade bushes, a speckboom that went in with it, not to be confused with the other jade bush, crassula. So this is Ganesh Ramba. I'll put it up on the screen. This is nice and perky, and it's got new growth points showing up everywhere, including on the one that I thought was dying even when I put it in, so I'm very pleased with that. Second round of Brachystegia. Claw growth and open growth, so it might just be going through phases. Not an unhealthy plant, a little bit of sunburn on the original leaf. Nothing major, and generally speaking the plant is healthy, so I'm happy. New growth slower on this one, but it is coming, so I'm happy with that. And the new growth on this one, again, it's a little behind. These 2 leaves I think did come up after it went in, but it's such a while since it went in, they're nice and settled now. There's a lovely little growth stem in the middle there. This one is lagging, but perfectly healthy, just a slightly rolled leaf from an insect there. Healthy leaf, healthy plant, growth stem coming just slowly. This one in a little more shelter with a little more growth. You can see this leaf is tender, this has only just come up. And then there's another growing point coming up there, so it should be soon. So this one, again a nice tender young leaf, and a healthy little growing point, so I'm happy with that. So our Brachystegia that is CF aquatica, but probably just another glabra. Yeah, a nice little growing point, a little bit squished by this aloe leaf that has taken some inopportune squashing, but it should also shelter it quite a lot, so I'm not going to remove it for now. These trees can twist and bend, they're actually often platted and sold in pots. They're lucky trees, but I'm happy enough with that. That's a nice tender growth on this one that's tucked right between 2 wild sesame bushes. You should be grateful that you can't smell the sesame because it can be a bit overpowering. And this little bit of new growth that was very claw-like last week is starting to soften out, so I think that'll open up soon. It's nice and tender, it's nice colour, and the stem and the growth point look healthy, so I'm happy with that generally. Bamboo. Something has landed on the tip here and broken this bit off, but otherwise reasonably happy, healthy, nice bits of growth poking out just about everywhere. Yeah, so this is a nice vigorous little transplant, and I'm happy enough with that. And I still haven't cleared around the second bamboo, but it's coming up really nicely. Nice and green, nice and vigorous, nice and healthy, doesn't seem to have been as squashed by any ill-advised kook holes as the other one. So yeah, I'm happy with that. So I think that is everything. Generally speaking, I'm quite happy with that. Everything seems to be growing fine, including the side of my face. But I would say everything's looking where I'd expect. I would like some things to be progressing a little bit faster, but nothing's regressing in a way that worries me particularly. I think probably the most worrying one is that phoenix from the mixed planting. Yeah, I'm quite happy. So yeah, if there's anything I've missed, which is possible, there's supposed to be 55 plantings. I think I've done 55, but I did lose count somewhere around 23. I will edit it in, so you will see everything, even if I forgot something. So thank you for watching, and yeah, tune in later today, well probably earlier today, but then tomorrow, when this goes up, to see what else we'll be planting.